Um, I totally forgot when I come away. I normally ask people not to introduce me because A, it takes up way too much time, and secondly, it leaves me, too high a bar to live up to occasionally. Anyway, my name is Atul Chitnis. I do a lot of things, as Johnny has told you. But what is primarily the core of everything that I do is I'm involved with technology. Now, for me, technology is not just fancy stuff, getting the latest gadgets or whatever. But technology is also the use of the same thing and getting people to use it. In the process of getting involved with technology over the years, I was involved with computers, for example, before I joined engineering college. And that's a very, very long time ago. I joined engineering college in 1981. 81? Yeah, whoa. It's a long time ago. And by that time, I was already professionally writing applications for a couple of companies in the area where I lived. And the reason why I got involved with computers is the same reason why I got involved with music, because I love creating stuff. So creation is a very big part of what I do. As time went by, and as Johnny also told you, I got involved with a lot of things, whether it was computers, whether it was communication, data communication, the internet, and whatnot. I wrote a lot about it. And even though I was very heavily involved in the actual development of software, over time, I found myself more and more involved with getting people involved with technology. And one day at one of the talks that I gave, somebody mentioned. Somebody actually asked me, "So what do you do these days? What applications do you write?" And I said, "I don't actually, because much of my time at that time was being spent in consulting, getting people involved in various things and whatnot." And that person said, "Oh, so you don't write code anymore, is it? You write people." And that kind of became my guideline for a lot of things that I did. I don't write code, I write people. And in writing people, I mean that I get people interested and I get people involved in technologies. Now, a lot of people mistakenly assume that I only do open source. Which is not true at all, and has never been true. It's just an assumption that a lot of people have had over the years. The reality is, I'm involved in anything that that interests me, and what interests me the most is technology and people using that technology. And then there's this little hidden agenda underneath as well, which is using the two to get people to talk to each other. Using technology, the technology part itself, and getting people to use technology. These two things I took and get them to talk to each other. Now, Johnny talked about my BBS. What fascinated me about my BBS, which used to run out of my bedroom for a long time, much to disgust of other people living in the house, mostly my wife, was that people would call in at any time of the day and would leave messages. Other people would log in, would leave more messages. They were actually talking to each other. Now, you look at this scenario. We are talking about a single telephone line attached to a computer, so only one person could be online at the time. People coming in, leaving messages, and then other people coming in one by one, picking up those messages later on, coming back in to post their replies and all that. This went on round the clock, 24 hours a day. That was fascinating to watch, especially when I wrote this little application that would query the database to show me where these calls were coming from. When I would know, we didn't have things like caller ID and stuff in those days. But we did have this little concept of a user registration. So typically people would put in at least which city they were calling from. So I could see, initially it was from my neighborhood, people calling from Malleshwaram, people calling from Bangalore, and slowly it started spreading out. And as the word spread, and at that time we were the only online system available in the country, I watched people from all over the country calling in and starting to get involved in discussions. There was no internet in those days. We are talking about, this was somewhere in the late 80s, 1988, 89. And what was fascinating to see was both the fact that people were taking so much trouble. You know, people were sitting over there and constantly dialing and dialing and dialing, trying to get into their BBS. And all they wanted to do was to pick up the latest messages and send the messages. Not private email. Private email actually was very little. Even though it was available, it was very little. What was mostly being done was people were discussing in forums. Now you go and look at the forums and see what kind of discussions were going on. And more of those discussions started talking about technology in some form or the other. You know, the internet was just becoming available in India. 1988 is when ERNet came up in the Indian Institute of Science. And over the years, people kept talking about the internet, but it wasn't really available until 1995 in India. So people kept discussing, and this was their pseudo-internet. This was really interesting because here we were using a little bit of technology, code that I had written, and which I just put up over there, and it just basically worked on its own. And people were using that to start discussing. So the people who got involved in the BBS at that time were also the kind of people who, at a later stage, when the internet became more accessible, would go out and put up a lot of information out there because they were already used to doing this. So they were actually already behaving internet-ish before the internet became available. And in doing so, they became the forerunners of what we would call a revolution of sorts, of people using technology to start communicating other than just picking up the phone and making expensive phone calls or writing letters or sending faxes. Then there were times when, obviously, anything that becomes big immediately comes under scrutiny of some authority or the other, trying to see whether one can make any money out of that. And then the government of India tried to, at some point, charge BBSs, and a lot of them had come up by then, charge BBSs at 1,500 rupees a subscriber. And here we are putting in our own money. This is free of charge. Nobody was being charged for anything. But we were supposed to pay the government of India 1,500 rupees per subscriber. At that point, I had close to 1,000 subscribers on my single line BBS. So clearly not a very optimal solution, right? So this led to something else. This led to using technology to establish your rights. So over all these BBSs and now also the internet, and a lot of people started making a lot of noise. This is called electronic activism. And electronic activism led to the fact that it became so embarrassing for the government that they were trying to literally kill a grassroots movement that the night before that document, which outlined all these things, called the Guide to Value-Added Services in India, was published. The night before, there were about 100 employees of the DOT sitting in Sanchar Bhavan in Delhi in the basement with stacks of blue-covered books in front of them and tearing out pages 62 through 68, which is where this scheme had been outlined. And when the next day, when the minister published a guide to value-added services, there was no mention of charging BBSs, which was, the first time that we saw this kind of thing happening over here in India. Now, people began to realize just how powerful the use of technology can be, not just for, technology for technology's sake, but also for achieving things in everyday life. Now, for me, this is a very important thing because I like to see people, using technology rather than just simply talking about it. There was a little problem, though. what I noticed in the mid 90s was that more and more people actually got involved with technology only at a very superficial level. At a level right at the top, but they would no longer understand how things worked as you went in deeper. They were just using very high level APIs, and which is all good and fine. I mean, you have to do that as well. But over time, what happens is that you end up not knowing what actually happens there. Like, for example, people fire up a machine and tell the machine to dial out via the modem so that it connects to the internet or whatever. Did anyone actually know what was going on over there, what was happening over there? And if you were supposed to write an application that did the same thing, all you would do was use the top level API, but you would never dig in deeper to see, can one make this better? Can one optimize this? Can one make it faster? Can one make it more secure? Is there a problem over here? And in that process, I actually got involved with things like Linux and open source. And for me, that was fascinating because I had always worked at a very, very low level upwards, down to, as they say, talking to the metal. But many people had not had the pleasure of doing that and could no longer do that because most of those APIs were proprietary. Okay, so there was no way you could actually dig in and find out more. But in the open source world, it was exactly the other way around. You were expected to know. And because you were forced to understand everything from the very lowest level to the highest level, and you had a chance to dig in if you were interested. Now, this was interesting for me because people who did that understood technology better. Which is why I said, okay, this is something worth pushing. This is worth getting people involved in this because everyone gains from this. There are many levels at which you can look at the open source community. One of them, of course, is that everyone does everything for free and whatnot, which is not strictly true. Like the other day, I had this terrible flame war going on where somebody cribbed like mad, saying that there's a guy who's selling software which is GPL. He's going against the GPL, the GNU General Public License. The guy obviously didn't understand what he was talking about. The GPL does not ever say that you are not allowed to sell stuff. Okay, it doesn't say you shouldn't make money. In fact, many people should make money. I mean, a classic example is a company like Google, which puts out a whole lot of stuff under open source licenses. And is anyone complaining about Google not making money? Or take IBM, the single largest business in the world. Anyone ever complained about IBM not making money? IBM functions almost entirely on the open source at every level, wherever they can. Though people keep pointing out, they've got proprietary products at all. Yeah, so they have proprietary products. Everyone has got proprietary products. Hey, I'm supposed to be this big guy pushing open source, right? I work for a software company that does proprietary products. There's nothing wrong with that. What would be wrong is if I would violate, for example, if I would take GPL code and sell it as closed source. That's wrong. But how many people understood that? So in order to get people to understand that, I started talking a little bit more to the community and try to understand, make people understand what this whole thing is all about. In the process, I found more and more people, this entire thing, I didn't even consider it as a community. I just thought, let me talk to people a bit. Now, I was already fairly used to writing in PC Quest and other magazines and getting a lot of responses. I once gave a talk recently, blogging in the 90s. So they said, but who was blogging in the 90s? There was no such thing as blogging in the 90s, but I was blogging in the 90s because if you read my articles in PC Quest, which I wrote from 1992 onwards, they read just like your everyday blog entry. Okay, so that's what whatever I was doing, I would sit down and write about it and put it up as an article. People liked it and read that, and that was it. So it was blogging in the 90s. So anyway, so now we come to the point where we are right now. At this point in time, a lot of people are aware of the power of communities, especially technology communities. They try to use it to the maximum, to leverage it, so to say, which is good and which is bad. I mean, I'm not going to sit and judge in that. But what was very interesting to see was how those communities evolved. So I'm going to talk about the open source community, and you will probably see how a technology community, that even a budding one, like, for example, this user group, could gain from that and take a few tips out of that. So the first thing that one needs to understand, that communities are not just about talking. You can't just sit and keep talking. You got to do something as well. Okay, you got to participate. So what I'm using over here is a set of posters that we actually created for an event 2 years ago. Each of these posters represents a contributor, an open source contributor from India. This is Nava Kumar. He wrote an application called Anjuta Dev Studio, which for a long time, and even today, became the de facto development environment for people who were developing in GNOME or developing UI-based applications, or just writing applications. He worked in Delhi. He was working for a company in Delhi. Ironically, I think in a search-oriented company that was trying to compete with Google. That didn't work out too well. But while he was over there, he had the need. He had a real need for a development environment which he could use in the environment that he liked working in, which was in Linux. So he sat down and wrote this application, which he called Anjuta, which why the name was the name of his girlfriend, which is a very dangerous thing to do. As somebody has already pointed out, there's one. Did I miss any women in the audience? There's one over here, which is not a good thing, which you'll see in the next slide. So he named it Anjuta and sat down, started developing it, and every now and then he would throw the tarball out there for people to have a look at and say, hey, can I do this any better? See, I've got this problem, I've got that problem. More and more people from all over the world got involved. And no time at all, this became an international project with people contributing around the clock from all over the planet. Okay, and the application became better and better and better and better. For many years, I used this application. I know a lot of people who are still using it. Naba today works for Nokia and is in Finland. Extremely cold over there. He's still working on open source. So when I asked him, when I first met him in 2001, I asked him, what is it, what is it, how do you get involved with this? How would you advise people to get involved with an open source project? And he wasn't really prepared for that kind of question because he was prepared for technical questions. He's a C wizard, and at the same event where Jani was, I guess, speaking, Linux Bangalore 2002, I think, or 2001, he would give technical talks, and all of a sudden he's being asked a question like that. And his statement, which went down literally on record, was participation. The first step is to contribution. If you want to contribute, the first thing you got to do is you got to participate in the thing. You can't just sit on the sidelines and say, oh, I'll watch this do, oh, that is wrong, this is wrong. You got to get involved. It's no good just sitting over there in the audience and saying, hey, that's a great talk, so I learned something today, I go back and that's it. Because neither does the community gain from that, nor does the object of attention, whatever the project is or whatever, gain from that. So you got to participate. And then he went on, I asked him, what do you understand by participation? He says, participation need not necessarily get involved. It's no good just sitting over there in the audience and saying, hey, that's a great talk, so I learned something today, I go back and that's it. Because neither does the community gain from that, nor does the object of attention, whatever the project is or whatever, gain from that. So you got to participate. And then he went on, I asked him, what do you understand by participation? He says, participation need not necessarily be writing code. It could be testing, it could be, creating a fancy UI, or, making nice icons, or just documenting something, but you got to participate. You don't participate in the project, okay, that project can't go anywhere. And that's something that's stuck. Okay, so we actually, year before last, Nabak came back to India to give the keynote address at Foster-in, which is what Linux Bangalore became later. And I asked him to address several questions that people had. And surprisingly, the same question came from the audience. How do we get started? How do we get involved with a free and open source software? And again, he said, you've got to participate. You can't just sit over there. You can't just use and keep quiet. You've got to be vocal. You can be vocal in many ways. You can be vocal by standing up and saying, hey, this is not working as it should, or maybe sending an email. Or it could be vocal as simple as firing up your editor and writing code and giving that code to the project. That's also being vocal. And then, since he mentioned this, again, the next question that he got was, again, you named your project Anjuta. How did that work out? Okay, because that's a dangerous thing to call a project after your girlfriend, especially if, a young guy who might change his girlfriends over time. At which point, he called his wife on the stage with their kid. Okay, the same Anjuta, his girlfriend from those days. He says, worked out for me. This is Anjuta 0.0. Now, when I talked to her, I asked her what was it like in the initial days, because they really suffered and they had a really bad time, where they were working in Delhi, but she stuck. And then this guy used to spend so much time on this project. And I asked her, what was it like? Why didn't you object? She said, maybe I had objections, but how could I stop him from doing what he was doing? He enjoyed it so much. He enjoyed it not just because of being involved in technology and learning things, but meeting people and being involved with people. That was a very, very big part of the entire process for him. How could I stop him? How could I? Look at where this led him today. I mean, he is really a very, very important person in the scheme of things. I can't talk too much about what he's doing right now at Nokia. That is NDA'd. But he's a person who is doing something you will probably feel the effects of within the next 6 months. Okay, and it's all open source based, though he's working for a closed source company. So let's move on. You have Gopal. Gopal works for Yahoo, and he is, as you can see just by his looks, and his hair or whatever, and this is actually when he combed his hair. You should see him now. He says code is an art form. I'm an artist. He does not say I'm a developer. I'm not a programmer. I'm an artist, and code is my art form. This is how I express myself. At the same time, you might think, okay, this is this uber hacker who, you would expect never sees the light of the sun, which is true, or at least very rarely, and, who does all sorts of crazy things and who drinks a lot of coffee, all true, and, who only sits and writes code, writes a lot of code, partially true. He writes a lot of code, true, but that's not all he does. One of the things he does is he goes out and reaches out to people and says, hey, what are you doing? Can I get involved in that? I've seen him, he's one of the core developers for PHP. Okay, now when I say core developers, I don't say he uses PHP to make applications, which is what most people do, which is what I do. Okay, this guy is one of the people who writes PHP. He and Rasmus Lerder work very closely together. But I have seen him get involved with everything under the sun. Okay, whether it is doing something in Python, he loves Python. This is a PHP programmer, a guy who develops PHP. Okay, this guy loves Python. Or doing something in Perl, or sitting down with a couple of people who are just setting out and showing them something. This is a guy who you would think is very impatient. He is, and who doesn't really have much time for stupid questions. That's true. He doesn't have time for stupid questions, but then he doesn't get asked stupid questions. That's the same thing. What he says is, people who ask questions want to learn. These are people who are going to get involved with my project tomorrow. It's best that I give them a good grounding today. Because once you move on from there, okay, these are the people who are going to, shore up everything and make sure that things continue working. So you see him at events, sitting somewhere in the corner, surrounded by a lot of people, and they're all sitting over there and either hacking on something really great, or simply having fun doing something. The first time I met Gopal was at an event over here, and he asked me, "I'm Gopal, what can I do?" So I looked at him, and I'm very heavily involved with this computer. And I looked at him and said, "So what is it that what you do? I mean, what are you hacking on these days?" So he was hacking on something called .GNU. .GNU is basically a .NET implementation of Linux. Mono is one of them. .GNU was another. .GNU is more aimed at smaller devices and stuff like that. So I looked at him and said, "Okay, here's a computer. Okay, you've got 3 days, which is the time that the event goes on, and let's see whether you can port .GNU to this computer." This computer is a Linux-based little machine, and an ARM-based machine. He had never seen it before. He had never seen anything of that sort before. But he sat down. I gave him a machine. He's somewhere there in the corner. On the last day, somewhere in the afternoon, there was a talk by a chappie by the name of Kalyan Verma. And just as Kalyan was about to give his talk, I pulled him back and said, "I need your slot." And I made Gopal stand up on the stage and tell us what he did in the past 3 days. So he was completely unprepared, no talk prepared, no nothing. And he goes and stands up there in front of like almost 700 odd people sitting in the audience and asks, "Does anyone here know what .NET is, .GNU is?" And he was, he had a lot of responses because there were a lot of people who were using those technologies over there. He says, "Well, this is what I was doing. I was involved, I was trying to port .NET to this little device." And he went on about technical stuff, and this is what he did. And some of the people started getting very glazed looks on their faces as he went into really heavy technology. And finally, somebody couldn't stand anymore and put up his hand and asked, "So tell us, what did you finally manage?" And this is typical Gopal. He was so involved with the technology, and he was so involved with what he was doing. He didn't realize that the taste of the pudding is in the eating. And that is really what the audience would be interested in. He said, "Oh," and he held up this computer and dropped a .NET application onto it, okay, and ran it. And it ran. For him, this was, this is what I set out to do, right? So it's okay, it's good. Okay, but for the audience, they had just witnessed something they had never seen before. Somebody took this entire massive .NET architecture and ported it to this little machine, and there were actually .NET.exes running on that machine. And he was showing that, complete with dialog boxes coming up and being able to click and whatnot. Everything worked. And he had ported this over in just 3 days. On that basis, he didn't even manage to get off the stage before Yahoo piled onto him and offered him a job. He was working at Wipro at the time. And Yahoo offered him a job, and he's been working over there ever since. But for him, this is, a form of expression. And an expression is pointless if you don't have an audience. So that's why he gets involved with the community. So it isn't just, you're hacking on a lot of cool stuff or doing a lot of cool stuff. It's also about showing what you have been doing. This was the slide I referred to. Now this lady, who is about EE High, is one of the foremost Linux kernel hackers in the world. This is Supana Bhattacharya. She works at IBM here in Bangalore. And I was in Germany for an event when I ran into a couple of Linux kernel hackers over there, including people like Harold Welte and whatnot. And I had just given a talk saying that I set out to look for contributors to open source in India, and I found very few of them. And so this guy walked up to me and said, did you find Supana? I said, who? I had no clue. So he showed me a photograph of Supana giving a talk at an event. And the photograph, the first photograph was, he showed me was, her standing over there and giving the talk. The next photograph was taken by someone who was standing behind her, a shot over her shoulder at the audience, right in front, in the first row, with a highly interested look on his face, making notes and doing all sorts of things, and over the photographs that followed, asking questions and all that, was somebody everyone in the world knew, a chappie by the name of Linus Torvalds. And this is somebody from India. In India, not just from India. There are a lot of people who are outside there who are contributing to open source, but they're not in India. They're Indians, but not in India. But this is somebody in India, okay, who commanded that kind of respect. And when I went to her and said, hey, would you come and talk at our conference? She said, I'd love to, but what could I possibly say that would be of interest? So I said, why don't you just talk about what is it and you do and why you do it? Now, most people assume that, the people who are sitting and hacking on various things, like, for example, in the Linux labs in IBM or whatever, they do it because they're paid. Far from it. Okay, there are some people you can pay as much money as you want to still want to do this kind of stuff. But she does it because she loves doing it. And she would do it even if she wasn't paid. Okay, and much of the stuff that she does has nothing to do with IBM's work at all. So she came and she talked about, not about, some heavy technical stuff. She's one of the people who wrote the ext3 file system and is also responsible for the ext4 file system. She didn't just talk about things like that, but she talked about something very simple. How do we as people work together on a project, as a community? How do we interact? And then you think about, you have these preconceived notions about how people in the open source world work. Okay, she presented a completely different picture. And you had this huge crowd of almost 1,000 people sitting there in front of her. And she was standing over there on the stage. She had a couple of slides, but no prepared talk, per se. And she talked about what, how the whole concept works, how people interact with each other, how they, for example, how she would talk or get involved with somebody like Linus Torvalds or Christopher Helwig or people like that. All of this are like, for anyone who's in the open source world, are like names of gods. Okay, she deals with them on an everyday basis. And she talked about how how nobody is valued by how much he talks. Like, for example, I, in this particular case, would have zero value over there, because I talk. But the people who actually do, they are the ones who are important. It was she who pointed me at this saying that became the slogan of our conference later, which is, talk is cheap, show me the code, which was made by Linus Torvalds when somebody kept criticizing whatever he was doing. He said, there's a better way of doing it, you should do it this way, you should do it that way. He turns around and says, okay, talk is cheap, show me the code. Bottom line is, the guy couldn't cough up code. He didn't have any code, and eventually when he did try to code it, it didn't really work. Okay, while what Linus had put together worked out of the box. So, I mean, all good and fine in theory, but finally it's your actions that count. And that's how this community works. You will see that there are lots of things that start settling out, like water finds its own level. Okay, things find their own level. And people who contribute, people who get involved, okay, they tend to be the ones who actually make things happen in the community. And then there are a lot of people who just watch or just talk, and they are like, you know, at the periphery of things, and they are not really involved. They don't really contribute. Overnight, she, after giving that talk, and then the next day she gave another more technical talk, she did something that many of us had been trying for years but couldn't do. Unfortunately, I totally forgot to bring that particular photograph along right now, but last year, we changed the format of our event to be more development oriented, and we had what we called a Linux kernel hacking session, which was basically a room of this sort, a little bigger than this, where anyone who was interested in actually hacking on the code, not talking or listening to talks and all that, could come over there and just sit in and then, you know, work on there was a list of problems which needed to be solved, okay, and these problems were being solved, and Supana was one of the people who was sitting over there. Now, what I find as, you know, the rubber stamp of approval of what she did and what she stands for is in that photograph that I forgot to bring along. I'll try and dig it out still. A nice connectivity over here. Almost 60% of the hackers in the crowd who were sitting over there were women. This is a change where, you know, people kept saying, we have to get more women involved, we have to get, why are women not getting involved? Shame on you. Okay, there was this small minority of guys who were sitting over there in a corner and looking fairly clueless. Okay, and most of the activity was, and what was happening and the useful stuff that was coming out over there was coming out of people like Supana, who were sitting over there and actually putting things together, discussing stuff, coming to a proper solution and putting it out over there. So if we talk about community problems, you know, people keep talking about we can't get women involved. It isn't because women are not interested. Women are interested in technology. The problem has always been us, not them. Okay, and to get them involved, you simply let them get involved instead of, you know, pushing people away. You learn a valuable social lesson over here. This is not just technology. You're here, you're learning a social lesson that comes out of technology, but is not about technology. Is that, you know, involvement comes out of letting people get involved. You have to be inclusive, not push them away. Not say, oh, you are so-and-so person. There were people sitting over there who were using Microsoft Windows and who basically have never before done anything in Linux. But they were developers, programmers. They knew things. And when they see a hard computing problem over there, it didn't matter whether they were Windows programmers or whether they were Linux programmers or whatever. This is a computing problem. And they used their knowledge and contributed over there, even though they had never contributed before. Okay, so it's easy to say, oh, you're a Windows user, you must not be involved in anything that's to do with Linux. That's stupid, that's being exclusive. You know, only your kind of people are allowed to. No. The community must be open and allow anyone to get in. It must keep its doors open. Anyone who shows any interest should be welcomed in. It doesn't matter who it is or where it is or what it is, or she is. One of the biggest problems that you see in reference to this thing is people say, oh, but I don't really know anything. I have never done anything of this sort. I don't know how to get involved. I can't really contribute. There's so many people here who know so much. This is Karthik Mistry, who was a developer sitting in Ahmedabad. And he had the same problem. And then after attending our event for a couple of times, he said, I can get involved. I can be involved. I can contribute. I can and I will. This was his statement. Okay. Today, Karthik is one of 4 or 5 recognized, registered Debian developers from India. Active Debian developers from India. Okay, now Debian Linux is the mother lode of just about everything that's happening in Linux today. And he is one of 5 dozen. A guy who 3 years ago said, but I don't know anything. Turns it out and tells himself, I can, and did. You know, it was such a shock for me to actually see a statement come true in front of my eyes. And when, you know, I very rarely talk about people in my blog, but I had to talk about this. That you had once said, I can and I will. And my additional line to that is, and you did. And I just linked to that page, which you don't know what you're pushing out. This guy, I mean, when you see, unfortunately, this photograph is taken from the side. You should see him from the front. He has got a forehead this big. I mean, intelligence just drips off him. Okay, the only thing is because he couldn't express himself properly initially, he felt that, you know, he couldn't contribute, but he did. And today he is a very valuable member of the open source community here in India. Earlier, it was mentioned that a very small fraction of people in India speak English, and the rest of them speak their native tongue around here. So that's a bit of a problem, right? If you've got an operating system that's only written in English. So this is a guy, you put him on stage, he has got a unique ability. He will send you to sleep in 5 minutes. He's the most boring speaker I have ever come across, and he's proud of it. But this guy single-handedly took on this hard problem of taking Linux, taking KDE, taking GNOME, and making it speak your language. He drives a project called in Linux, which basically is the base for getting people to transliterate, and getting Linux to speak in your whatever language. So we've got just about every language and dialect you can possibly think of. Today, Linux can speak all of them. When you install a copy of Linux, and you know it shows you a list, which languages do you want to install? That list goes on and on and on. Okay, and the most languages in that are Indian ones. In that entire list. I mean, you've got other things like Russian and German and whatnot. But most of the languages that you see listed over there are Indian ones. Indian languages, okay. This one guy was responsible for getting that off the ground. And then he went and he got more people involved. Obviously, this is not something you can do alone. He got more people involved. Anyone whom he saw had even the slightest amount of interest, he said, hey, you speak this language, you know this thing here, this is how you can contribute. And he showed them how to contribute. But after 2 years, we stopped putting him on stage because it was difficult waking up the audience after the talk. But you know, he is somebody who really, really, really gets involved. So do you judge a guy by how good he is in his presentation skills, or how great his slides look, or whatever, or by his actions? And this guy's actions speak loud words in various languages, in lots of languages. This little guy, and when I say little, I mean it, okay? Pradipto came in 2005 to Bangalore to attend the event over here, and he knew nothing. And he just came because, you know, lots of his friends were coming, so he also came along. And he did know a little bit about UI stuff, and, you know, things like Qt and whatnot, which is basically a toolkit for developing applications and whatnot. And from 2005 to now, we have got mid-2009. He's the foremost contributor to KDE from India. Anything that happens in terms of KDE in India, he is involved. Okay, this is a guy who just for a few years ago didn't know, or said, I don't know anything, I can't get around. There are people, so many big people around over here who know so much. Again, this guy contributed. Not only did he contribute, he took it upon himself to become a leader and get more people involved. At his own cost, goes and prints booklets about KDE, the quality of which was so good that it's being used in some marketing firms today to show, see, this is how you make an advertising brochure. This is how you make a product brochure. Okay, he spent his own money to get this thing done, and anywhere that we go today in the world, any event that we attend in the world, we are sure to find some copies of that booklet around. And it turns out it was the first time somebody had ever done anything like this in the open source world. And others picked that up. They took his lead, okay, and they picked it up, and now just about everyone is doing it. Just like, you know, a few years back we started making these posters, and now today everyone is doing it. A person like that wouldn't have been able to do this if it wouldn't have been for a community that regularly came together, not just online. So this is where a mistake happens. Everyone thinks, oh, everything should happen online. Okay, it's a technical community, so everything must happen online. No. You've got to see each other's faces once in a while. Now, this guy had been following stuff that's been happening on the mailing list, but it wasn't until he actually got to see real faces and interact with real people, okay, that he got interested. This is important. Many of you could have been online on Twitter right now and reading, you know, whatever's happening, but you wouldn't get the feel of the event or the feel of being around, having people around and interacting with them. Remember this when you go for lunch and when you start talking to each other, when you learn of an interesting fact, okay, that registers, because this is something that doesn't happen in formal communication or in electronic communication. There are some things which come across where you just have to be together as people, as, you know, as a crowd who share an interest in something. Shreyas, he's a very, very difficult person to describe. So this is the guy. I'm using OpenOffice over there on my notebook. I'm running macOS on that notebook, and I'm using OpenOffice. Now, OpenOffice is this Microsoft Office-like suite of applications, which I'm sure everyone over here has used. This is the guy who ported it to the Mac. I knew Shreyas for 2 years before I found that out. He was actually working at Novell and took this upon himself, let me try and do this. And he ported the first port of OpenOffice to the Mac operating system. Was done by this guy, literally single-handedly. I'm able to show my slides here without shame. By without shame, as in nobody over here can point a finger and say, hey, you're using closed source stuff, or you're using Microsoft Office or whatever, which is not a bad thing for most people, but in my case, it would be kind of, it would be a bad career move. Okay, but because of him, I'm able to do this. All he did, and that's a lot, I mean, saying all he did is kind of trivializing it. But what he did is he took the application and said, I'm using a Mac. I can't use OpenOffice. I want to use OpenOffice, so I have to port OpenOffice to the Mac. And he did. Have an itch, will scratch. That's how the open source community works. Today, you know, the fact that OpenOffice exists is because of one guy who had an itch that he needed to scratch a few years back. He's one of the most active people in the FOSS.in team today. People who sit and create this event every day, but he does it with a passion. And he likes to say, you know, when you have freedom, it shows. When you're involved with something, like he's involved with software freedom, okay? But when you're involved with something, it's kind of drips off you, you know, it shines off you like an aura. You can't mistake him. You can go into a crowd and you can pick out the guy immediately and say, hey, that guy is like really into it. This guy is really into it. Okay, and he does a lot of other things also, like you can go to a place called radioverb.com. RadioVerb has nothing to do with open source. Okay? But what does RadioVerb do? RadioVerb is an online internet radio which plays music. There are millions of such radio stations across the planet. But this one has a twist. It doesn't play published commercial music. It only plays music by independent, unpublished people who have no other way of getting their music heard. So his involvement in the open source community has led him to do something like this. Recognize the fact that there are a lot of musicians who are doing a lot of good stuff whom you will never hear. Okay, let me give them a platform on which they can be heard. And he did. And today, I mean, I give this example over and over again, but I love telling this particular story, so bear with me. So I go to an event in Germany, and in the evening there's a party at a friend's place, at a friend of a friend's place. And I was asked to come along. So I go over there, and I knock on the door. I know only one or two people in that particular party, but anyway, I knock on the door, and the person who had thrown the party opens the door, lets me in, and he says, the party is going on in that room. So we go into that room. I open the door, and there is a loud Malayalam rock music coming out from. It's so loud, I have not ever felt music that loud before unless I was at a live show. Malayalam rock music. In a German apartment. Apart from me, there were only two other people who had dark hair. Everyone else was blonde with blue eyes. And they were rocking it out over there to listening to this group called Avial, which was coming from the speakers. I said, where did you get that from? Oh no, there's this radio station, there's internet radio station. And they were listening to Radio Verve. Shreyas's Radio Verve. They had no clue that I was involved with that. They had no clue, they had no way of knowing, okay, that was even from India. Because they didn't know the language. They just loved the music. This is the kind of impact a guy sitting in India, just because he really likes to get involved, he does stuff like this. And a group which was somewhere in the heartland of Kerala was getting international exposure. They later on came out with an album, and now they're touring all over the world and performing and all that. They had their first exposure through what this guy was doing. So the point I'm trying to make is that when you're involved with the community, it's not just the direct one-on-one thing that you do. Oh, when you're involved with the Linux community, you must only work with Linux. But there are a whole lot of other things that come out with it, and you should encourage that. So this is Tejas Dinkar. He's a student, or rather, he's just finished his engineering 2 weeks ago. He got his results 2 weeks ago. He's no longer a student technically. He is now an engineer. When this photograph was taken, he was a student. And he was contributing, as a student, was contributing to the community. In many ways, he was contributing code. Okay, today, if you use KDE and if you're using the KDE IM copied, much of that stuff has been written by this guy. Okay, as a student. So question, is there an age limit when you can get involved with the community? Answer is no, there isn't. The only thing that defines whether you can get involved or not is whether you're interested or not. That's important. You have to get people, you have to recognize doesn't matter, that guy is very young, okay, but he is interested. He's going to make a difference. And he did. This guy did. Now, you ask him, why did you get involved with open source? He says, in many ways. I enjoy doing it. That, of course, is the most obvious answer. But I'm also paying forward. I had not heard of this phrase before, paying it forward. I'm sure many of you haven't heard of it either. There's actually a movie by this name, which you should see. Paying it forward is like saying, I'm returning a favor, or I'm giving back to the community for stuff that they have done for me, but in reverse. Paying forward means you're giving back. You're not giving back, you're giving forward. It is in future I know that this community is going to help me. Let me do something for them now. That's paying forward. Now, this guy is actually born and brought up in the US and now lives in India. He actually has an American passport. And so he was very familiar with this phrase, and he used this phrase, and I couldn't understand it. I went and looked up. I then got the movie by this name. You should see this movie. It's really touching. Unfortunately, a bit of a tragic ending, but it's really touching. You should see this movie. And then I understood, after I saw the movie, I understood why this guy is so passionate about what he's doing. Then there's this bunch of people that we call Team for Student. Now, for the past 10 years, given a few changes here and there, this has been the core group that has been driving this event that we call, used to call Linux Bangalore, and in 2005 renamed to FOSS.in. Basically, it is just like Shreyas's Radio Verve, which is a platform for people who otherwise wouldn't have a chance to be heard. Okay? FOSS.in is a platform for Indian free and open source software developers to come and participate and be seen and have their contributions recognized. When we started, we were a small little regional event. Today, we are rated as one of 3 most important free and open source events in the world. Okay? So much so that last year, 30% of our audience was from outside India. And that's fairly typical. More and more people come over here because they recognize there is so much talent over here. People who are running open source projects come over here because they want to find people from India to get involved in their projects because it's to the benefit of their projects. So what is the open source project we run? Since we talk so much. FOSS.in is our project. It's a platform. What's the code we use for writing our platform? It's called people. Okay, it's completely volunteer driven. Nobody gets paid for anything. Either we shell out from our own pockets, or we go and bang on doors, sponsors, whatever, we get money together. This event happens every year, last week of November, first week of December, here in Bangalore. Typical between 700 to 1,000 people. It used to be at one time, in 2005, we had more than 4,000 people attending, and that was absolute madness. So we decided that that's not something we want to do again. It's extremely heavily focused on development. But it is not just about that. It's about a community. It's about getting people who have been working together online all year round to come together and actually see each other's faces. Remember I said this is important? Okay, it's important that you get to see each other's faces once in a while. This is where the community in India comes together. Once upon a time, it was to get together the Indian community. More and more, it's becoming the international community. Because we've had everyone from Alan Cox, Harold Welte, Jonathan Corbett, and whatever big names you can possibly think of, they have come and spoken at this event and participated at this event. You will find what Jani described earlier, this concept of there are no superheroes and you look at them, I wish I was like that. Because at FOSS.in, everyone is at the same level. And at any time, the roles may reverse. Your superhero might be sitting in the audience while you're standing on stage and talking. Okay, so to keep a community going, you have to get them together every now and then. If you don't get them together every now and then it becomes too easy to make an excuse and say, oh, well, I didn't get your email. I'm sure you've heard that one before. So this year, FOSS.in is on December 1st to 5th, 2009. And if you want to get involved with that, now you will find, and how does all this fit in over here? We are trying to build a community, right? We are trying to build a community which is based on the technologies that Google puts out for free. Much of it is open source. In fact, you will find the same community that's contributing to this community working in the free and open source community as well. Okay. Google has been a sponsor of this event for many years, so it's very easy for me to talk about Google's involvement over here. But the fact is, I mean, for example, a simple thing. How do you think we organize these events? You think we write fancy applications and event management packages? It's not a bull. We use Google Docs online. How do you think we do our scheduling? Once upon a time, we wrote this really heavy, fancy thing with drag and drop, and where you could drag the speaker name and then drop him over into this particular slot, and it drove us nuts. Okay, what do we do today? We've got this nice spreadsheet open on Google Docs. We are spread all over the Team Foster is spread all over the world. Okay, and people are online, and then you will constantly see cells moving around and things being put over there. We can. And because we can, we use those things. All our storage, everything that we do is on Google Docs. Why? Because you never know when that machine is going to go bust that we're working on. We've had that experience also. Okay, so whether we are chatting, we love using stuff that's open standards based. So Google Talk was a natural because it's XMPP based, and that's easy for us to use. But you will see us using open source tools, and very often those tools that we are using are tools that come out maybe even out of this building. One of the problems that we have this year that's unique to this particular year, hasn't happened before for the event, is we have a new venue. So far, we were always in the Institute of Science, okay, Indian Institute of Science, which is very easy to find. But this year, we are at the Nimhans Convention Center, which some people know, but boy, people are going to have a really tough time finding that place. Okay, so we have already been working out Google Maps and whatnot, and getting traces, and this is how you get from this point to this point, and various things. All those maps will be online with pointers, and those will be live maps. Those maps may change. You look at it the first time, it will be one way, and we find a better way, better route of doing things. We will go and change it, and so when you go looking for Foster in this year on Google Maps, you will find various ways of getting there. Like I said, the motto that we follow is talk is cheap, show me the code. Okay, it's easy to sit and talk. It's easy to say a lot of things, but in the end, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. Okay, so what we do at Foster In is basically encourage people to come over there and work on real hard problems. Make changes to code, develop new stuff, come up with new ideas. Teams from all over the world get together, okay, and work with technologies they have either used before or are brand new to them. Last year, for example, there was this one guy who was sitting over there and who was working on hacking GSM codes, not GSM codes, the GSM protocol. Not for the sake of doing something unethical over there. He was actually doing something that benefited the industry because he was finding holes that needed fixing. Okay, he found ways to optimize things and do things better. He found reasons why, for example, some handsets would stop functioning in certain ways. He found ways in which, to get phones to work optimally. Last year, I was at the Chaos Computer Club conference, hacker conference in Berlin. And as I walked in over there, I had my cell phone with me, and all of a sudden, it changed providers. Until then, I was on T-Mobile, and all of a sudden, it changed providers to CCC. 25C3. So who is this provider? 25C3 is the name of the conference. Who is this provider? They were actually running a GSM base station inside the conference. Okay, and we were using our cell phones like intercoms over there. And that GSM station was linked to the internet via VoIP, okay, so you could make calls going out and you could have calls coming in and whatnot. That thing started and was seen for the first time at Foster In last year. So this is the kind of stuff that that happens over there. This is the kind of stuff where, you know, the community recognizes when there's a huge amount of activity going on somewhere, and they tend to, you know, congregate on that spot. So the more activity you generate, the more you will see people getting involved. So, I mean, what I've given you over here are experience and what I have been doing over the past few years in terms of the community. What is it that I expect to see coming out of things like this? Like I said, I mean, the most important thing for me is the technology aspect, the technology itself, and people understanding that technology, not just using it, but understanding what they're using over there, being able to make it better, fix it. One of the reasons why, for example, Google didn't go and put Google Chrome, you know, out there for all the platforms and here, just go and use it, was because that would have been illogical. It's much easier to, and much better for you're putting the code out there and then let people work with it and find better ways of doing that. So this is why, you know, each iteration of Google Chrome that comes out actually has a much more refined feel, is much faster, is much better, because there are contributions coming in from all over. That's a community at work. Okay, this kind of community already affects you on an every day that you're in. When I switch on my TV, okay, I have a big Sony TV, not as big as I would want it to be, but it's fairly big. When I switch that on, I'm switching on a Linux computer. That's a community at work. That Sony TV runs Linux inside. I didn't know that for the first 2 years that I owned that TV. But it runs Linux inside. Okay, and it's possible because a community has worked. Once upon a time, somebody asked Linus Torvalds, oh, now Linux has been ported to supercomputers. IBM had just ported Linux to their you know, mainframes and all that. Linux has been ported to the mainframes. So what's the next big thing? Linus said, it's not the next big thing. It's the next small thing I'm interested in. Because it's the small things, the small devices, the phones, the watches and whatnot, okay, that are going to be important in the future. And he was very right about that. Because if you look at it today, just look at what's happening today in the world. Your phones that you are using, almost certainly a phone that you will buy next year will be using open source technology. It could be running Android, or it could be running something from Nokia. Nokia is switching over to Linux. Then they are abandoning Symbian. They are open sourcing Symbian, but they are abandoning it. They're switching over to Linux and Qt and whatnot. So very likely next year, when you pick up a smartphone, it's going to be running Linux. It's going to be running some kind of open source technology in there. And you can be a part of that today. You can be a part of this, and you just get involved with the community. Similarly, you get involved with the technology community over here, not just to the level of using the stuff, but actually digging into it, understanding it, and contributing back. Okay, then you will end up with a community that has that kind of impact that today the Linux community, the open source community has on the rest of the world in terms of technology. Okay, you might have a few questions. I know that, as usual, I will have overrun like mad. If you have questions, you got my email address over there. If you want to know more about FOSS.in, you can just go to the site and figure it out. The first person who asks what's the URL for FOSS.in gets thrown out of the room. Okay, that shows that you're unworthy of being sitting inside this audience. If you want to know what kind of impact the communities I've been working with would have on your group, okay, there is no part inside this room, inside this audience, that doesn't have at least one person sitting in it who is from the open source community. Every part of this room has at least one person sitting over here who is not just a member of the open source community, but is an active contributor to it, is an active user, has been part of this community, has been helping the community grow. So this community over here, it's very easy for me to talk to this particular community because half of you are already my community. Okay, so once you recognize that and the fact that resistance is futile, okay, you will be assimilated. Throw away all apprehensions. Don't think, oh, I can't get involved with this. I don't know anything much and all that. Everyone who's sitting in this room, who's actively involved today, also said the same thing. And look at what they're doing today. Okay? So communities are meant to be built. They're built by people. Every single person contributes to a community. The easiest way for you to ensure that this happens is simply that you contribute, that you participate, get involved. Because it's only when you get involved that the community grows. Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you feel that we should be having lunch, which I would agree with. I knew I had forgotten something in the morning. I just realized when I got on stage, which was I forgot to have my breakfast. So does anyone have any questions?
With all this contribution towards the open source community, all the worldwide, is there an intention behind to dethrone Microsoft?
No. It's very simple. Many people seem to feel that, oh, this open source world hates Microsoft, and they only are there, their entire existence revolves around, uprooting Microsoft and throwing them out and making sure that they fail. I can tell you this, most of us don't even bother. Why should we have to bother? We are not competing with Microsoft. Microsoft is competing with us. Yeah.
I totally agree with what you just said, but we have a Linux user group in our college, and they were showing some promotional videos of Red Hat.
Right.
And in those videos, every video, it starts with criticizing Microsoft.
Sure.
But why is that?
Because some people do it that way.
But why?
See, let's be frank about it. It's very easy to criticize Microsoft. Very easy. First of all, they're the single largest software company in the world. Okay? Now, if I take any two people from here and ask them to go down the stairs, the chances of one of them tripping and falling on his face is remote. But if I ask this entire crowd now to go down, a couple of people are likely to stumble and fall down. Okay? So the bigger you are, the more mistakes you make. Okay? Microsoft has made mistakes in the past. But those mistakes are also partially responsible for the open source community existing today. Okay? There is someone who saw an opportunity over here. They are doing it this way. We will do it this way. It's better. Because we are not hardwired to having to do it that way, which you would have to do if you follow only the Microsoft APIs and all that. But instead, decide to do it your own way and build your own framework and build your own APIs. You're free to do things better. This is the reason why, for example, today, if you look at Internet Explorer, you look at Internet Explorer 1 to Internet Explorer 6, and you will see virtually no difference. But then comes along Internet Explorer 7 and now Internet Explorer 8. And they are vastly different. Do you know why? It is because there's an open source application called Firefox, which is much better, which people preferred using. And now all of a sudden you get jolted out of your status quo and say, until now we thought we owned this market, now we don't. Okay, so we got to catch up with that. And they did. Who has benefited from this? The consumer. Everyone over here benefits from that. If you use Internet Explorer 8.0 today, you're using an almost standards compliant browser. But if you use Internet Explorer 6.0, okay, you are not going to get many fans in this room. Okay, so the point over here is that when somebody comes and makes jokes about Microsoft, it is simply because they are the biggest gorilla sitting in the room. It's easy to pick on them. But make no mistake about this. Some of the smartest people in the world in terms of technology work at Microsoft. I would love to get those guys out of there and have them contributing to the open source world. And you know what? They do. I'm not talking about big, hyped up 20,000 lines of code kind of contributions, which is going on right now. But under the surface, there are thousands of people from the Microsoft world, from Microsoft, who are contributing back over here. The first time I met Johnny, for example, he was working at Microsoft, but he comes and speaks at a Linux conference, and he speaks about something that was useful to Linux developers. Unheard of. I mean, there was a lot of, oh my God, we can't have somebody from Microsoft coming and speaking at our conference. We didn't look at where he was coming from. We looked at what he was offering. And what he offered was very useful. In fact, the next year time that he came and spoke, you were in that 120-seater thing. A hall which was meant to seat 120 people had 260 people sitting in it. Okay, we got pulled up by the cops because we created a safety hazard over there. There were people sitting inside the projection room, okay, listening to a talk about how to get Linux and Windows working smoothly together, talking to each other, okay, given by somebody from Microsoft. So don't get this wrong. It's easy to pick on the Microsoft guys, okay? But the guys who really need picking on at Microsoft are the marketing guys. The marketing guys basically are doing everything wrong, okay? By abusing Linux, by going and doing things it's the marketing people who don't get it. Everyone else does, okay? The accountants definitely get it because they are seeing their profits plummeting. The technical guys definitely get it because the technologies they're working today are technologies that often come out of the open source world. Okay, it's just a small segment of people within the company that really need making jokes about. We love making jokes about one. The people who make jokes at Red Hat about Microsoft, those are also marketing people. Forgive them; they don't know what they're doing.
What do you think would be the major boost to desktop computing from the Linux? Would it be Google Chrome OS or would it be Ubuntu or any kind of a major boost?
At this point in time, I can categorically say this, and I can say this with greatest of confidence and with greatest of authority. The desktop is dead. So stop thinking about it. Okay, stop thinking about what is it that we can do to push Microsoft out of the desktop and have everybody use Google or Google's OS or Mac OS or whatever. The desktop is dead. People are not buying desktops anymore. People have evolved. Okay, there is more that I can do with a cell phone like this today than I could do 3 years ago on a PC. Okay, I mean nowadays when I want to download a movie, I use a BitTorrent client on this. Okay, I remember the first time I used BitTorrent, it almost killed my PC that I had sitting on my desktop. Okay, but this guy happily uses it. This is where the future is. This is anything that's mobile, anything that's moving around. And I'm not talking about laptops anymore. I'm talking beyond laptops. So really speaking, the operating system is no longer the criteria. The desktop thing is no longer the criteria. You may argue, no, that's not true, and people will always be using, that you're either working for a company that heavily depends on desktop software, or you haven't quite seen the larger picture of things. Okay, the most successful device in recent times is not the PC. The most successful device in recent times is the iPod. Okay, the iPod is a device which can do a lot of things, and people are very comfortable with that because they can put that in their pocket and they can move around and they can do things anywhere. Nobody dictates where you have to be in order to do it. But these things don't have much storage, do they? Does it matter? Because everything is on the cloud anyway. Everything is on the web. Okay, the applications are running on the web, the data is sitting on the web. Sure, I mean, every now and then I would like to back up my stuff, and I do. But this is where things are basically going. So what is it that Linux needs to do to conquer the desktop? Let me tell you, it's already done it. It's made the desktop irrelevant. Okay, if you look at most mobile devices today work on open source technologies. Okay, so I mean, that answers the question. I know that because I work with those things on an everyday basis. And I see sometimes stuff, sometimes before the rest of the world sees them. I get to play around with stuff which just blows my mind. And I say, why haven't you brought out this product yet? Oh, no. First of all, let's finish milking the market for the existing products. Then next year we will introduce this. Okay, also can be done. Also a way of doing things. Fair. But the desktop is history.
But legacy computing can never be ignored, right?
Sure. Legacy computing is never about desktops. Legacy computing is about data and about applications, but it's never about desktops, ever. If you look at it, today the Macs are beginning to eat into the desktop market like nobody's business. Okay, does anyone care? As long as it can run applications that can use the data that you had before, you're fine. Yeah.
We're seeing lots of communities like Windows, Java, community. Some of them might survive longer than others. Some may just drop on their core process. Some of them die. So what is it that you do?
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Sure.
I just want to make this the last question so that we can go for lunch, come back, and then we'll have the other sessions also. And if you have anything, you can take it offline, and there's always the group.
Please don't take it offline. Keep it online. Don't use that phrase.
Okay, so you can take it online.
Yeah. So the question is, what is it that I or people like me have been doing to make this community survive, where other communities like, product-driven communities like a Windows community or Java community or other communities have just died away, okay, and have not really managed to survive. The only thing that we have really done is to recognize two things. One thing is people really do want to be part of a community. But to be part of a community, they have to know how they can get involved. So what we have been doing is we have been providing continuously information about this. We have been providing ways by which they can find out how they can quickly get involved. The other thing that we recognize is that every person is inherently capable of contributing to the community and making the community grow. Okay, the problem has always been, especially if you take a community, a technical community in India, has been one of either language or here in India, we are very position oriented. Okay, so then we tend to have these heroes. I call this the Rasmus-Ladov effect. Okay, so the Rasmus effect is when you know that somebody who's the person who invented PHP and who created PHP and all that, if he's speaking at a conference or if he is participating in a community, how can you? You should quietly sit and worship at his feet. Okay, that has been a horrible situation, especially here because people tend to hero worship a lot. You need to kill that. You need to recognize that there's this guy, he wants to contribute, he is capable of contributing, but he's not willing to step forward because there is this, larger than life superhero who is over there and overshadowing everything else. The way we have approached this is we have actually every year before our event, and I know this happens now a lot everywhere else as well, what we do is we call together all these superheroes and we explain to them what the problem is here in India. And in many, it turns out, is also a problem in many others. And tell them it's not going to work. what we are trying to do is not going to work if you're going to walk onto the stage, talk, and then walk away, okay, with your bodyguards around you or, limousines to come and whisk you away. It only works if you, once you have finished your talk, you walk off stage and you go and sit there with these guys and get them involved. Be one of them, rather than, having all of them look up at you. Be there, be part, be one of them. That is very, very, very important, that you do not allow these levels to be created. Of course, one of the things that tears apart any community is politics. Okay, you say, oh, no, I'm going to be the leader, or I'm going to be this, or I think it should be done this way, so what these guys are doing is all wrong. I have a standard answer for people who have criticism. If somebody comes to me and criticizes me and says, you're doing it all wrong, you shouldn't be doing it this way, you should be doing it that way, I say, great. Do your own conference. Not only do I want you to do your own conference, I will come and help you. And we actually do that. Foster in any leftover sponsorship money, we contribute to other conferences. Okay, we send speakers at our cost. We identify people who can contribute. We send speakers to other conferences. We have them attend over there. Okay, we have them, our people go over there and then see, hey, there's this, I found this guy in this engineering college. He's really doing great work. Nobody's ever heard of him. We almost physically lift that guy and bring him and shine the spotlight on him. And have him, be recognized so that he can contribute as an equal rather than, as somebody who's just standing down there looking up. This is important. Recognizing people is very, 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 very important. Because if you don't, and if you start creating these levels of, heroes, then you have a problem. That community is not going to survive. And most of all, don't ever tell the community what to do. The minute you tell the community what to do, okay, you should do this, you should do that. No, this particular project, the menu bar should be like this, not like that. The minute you tell people what to do, they will go against you. You will have a split. That community cannot survive. In almost every community, technical community that I've seen that has died, it has been because if it is a product-oriented community, let's say like Java or something Windows-based or whatever, typically it dies because the people who own that technology try to dictate terms. It doesn't work. That does not work. The minute you try to do that, you have lost them. They will sit, they will listen to you. They might even worship you for a while. But finally, they realize that they are smarter than you, okay, and they can do better than you, and the community dies. And I have seen this happen. I've been the cause of this in the past. Okay, one of the reasons why in 2004, I actually physically, I stood on stage and I said, this doesn't work. Because I was standing there and I was dictating to people, I was micromanaging people, and I was telling that community, you have to do this and you have to do that. I said, this is not going to work. This is not working. We have to do it another way. And that's why we changed what we were doing over there. And what we said is we will provide a platform, but what's on the platform doesn't come from us. We don't go out and seek out speakers and big names and whatnot. We want the community to contribute to this. Okay, so if you want to be involved in this, you come over here. Here's a platform, you can participate. Of course, we put some checks and balances. We don't want people to come over there and giving talks which are either not interesting or which don't have any depth, or we don't want people to come over there and even worse, start selling on stage, selling their products on stage. We don't want that kind of stuff. But apart from that, we let people just talk about whatever they want. So we enable the community. We step back and don't dictate anything further. That's the only way you can let a community thrive.